Jeff Sharon joins us from Black and Gold banner on the SB Nation platform for UCF football. Jeff, how you doing tonight?
What's going on, Mark? Always good to talk to you. Thanks for having me back again.
I appreciate you waiting. We try to schedule these out, and then things happen, and our guests get log jammed here a bit. But
it's actually okay because I was listening to the entire conversation that you had with Steve, and there's those of us down here at UCF can tell everyone a thing or two about having a good season and not making the playoff.
Oh, you can warm up the same speech for this year and just give it again. So what I will ask you is, because everyone, as Steve and I were talking about, are hyper-focused on the college football playoff, what has been your response and the UCF fan base's response to the ranking at number 12, I believe, still stands at number 12 for UCF?
Well, they were 12 2 weeks in a row, and then this week they bumped them up one spot to 11 after beating Navy by 11. So we're kind of at a point now, I think, Mark, where there's sort of two camps, and one camp is sort of gaining more personnel. The two camps in UCF world are they were never going to let us into the playoff at all. There's just no point to it. The heck with it all. And then camp B is we're still holding out hope. There's a remote possibility it's going to take a bunch of dominoes to fall, but there's just they're not going to keep UCF out of the playoff if they go undefeated and say Alabama and Clemson go undefeated and everyone else has 2 losses, right? They're not going to keep UCF out of the playoff there. But I think that the way the last 3 weeks of the rankings have gone, where UCF started at 12 in the first poll, then they stayed at 12 the following week, actually got leapfrogged by a couple of teams, and was actually the only team that was actually penalized for winning, if you can say that, because they dropped actually a couple spots also in the coaches in the AP, or dropped one spot in the coaches in the AP, even though that doesn't really matter at this point. But they move up one spot this week, and I think most UCF fans are kind of looking at this saying, you know what, throw our hands up in the air. I mean, there's really nothing at this point that UCF can do, even if they win out, to get the kind of recognition they believe from the committee that UCF feels they deserve. It's unfortunate, but it's one of the things that I think we're more or less emotionally preparing ourselves for at this point.
We've got Jeff Sharon on the line from Gold and Black banner. It's the SB Nation platform for UCF sports, UCF football, the talk right here, with Cincinnati coming up as just a one-loss team and a 7-point favorite. We'll talk about that in just a second, coming up on Saturday. So, Jeff, let's stay in the college football playoff scenario here, because this fascinates me and everybody else. So what you just said about comparing UCF as an undefeated team versus a bunch of 2-loss champions makes complete sense to me. I totally agree with you, but I don't necessarily know if the selection committee is going to agree with us.
Yeah.
Because let's say Oklahoma, they're sitting at number 6 right now in the country. If they lose this week or next week, and let's say they drop a few spots to 8 or 9, and then they jump up and win the Big 12 championship, well, then they're going to bump their resume back up. And the same thing could happen to a Michigan or somebody like that. Maybe not so much Washington State. They've got a little less cachet. But I completely agree with you. There are opportunities out there for teams to get knocked off, more so than what we've seen in recent years by very marginal teams like an ACC Coastal champion in Pitt, who ironically got blown out by UCF. Wouldn't that be, again, some poetic justice, much like what we saw with Auburn last year, where UCF beats Pitt, who beats Clemson? Would be tremendous. I'm sure that you would just love that, relish that.
The transitive property lives. I think that the hard part for UCF is that if we're talking about, I think as your previous guest Steve was talking about, objective versus subjective standards of measurement. If you look at objective standards of measurement, by most accounts, UCF belongs in that upper tier. Okay. I think we can all agree that Alabama and Clemson are probably are at the top. And then there's some space. And then you have the likes of Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Michigan to some extent, some of those other teams that are in that sort of cluster that are competing for spots number 3 and 4. If you look at the numbers that UCF has put up this year, okay, they compare very favorably. And I'll give you an example. If UCF playing in the American Athletic Conference, if the argument against them is, well, they play a weak schedule, well, look what they've done against the schedule. Okay. Like you mentioned, they walked into Pittsburgh, came into UCF and got absolutely walloped in that game. It was 45-7 until the very last play of the game when Pitt scored a meaningless touchdown to make it 45-14. UCF has been toying with teams on offense. Now, I know people are going to say, well, you gave up 40 points to Temple. Temple's a good football team. Go look at their record since the third week. By the way, they lost their first 2 games to Villanova and then to Buffalo. Buffalo is actually pretty good, and they actually started the wrong quarterback the first 2 weeks. Since they started Russo, he's been excellent. The Knights, with bear in mind, first-year head coach Josh Heupel, an entirely new coaching staff. There's no one that's left over from last year when Scott Frost was here. Okay. He took the entire staff, including 2 UCF alumni with him to Lincoln. Okay. So a whole new staff comes in. UCF was top 5 in total offense, scoring offense as well. Guess what? They're top 10. They're top 5 in total offense at 543 a game. It's 3rd in the country. They're top 10 in scoring offense at 44.2 a game. And people say, well, what about the rushing defense? Well, they've really struggled this year against the run. Teams are just running all over them. Well, I'll call your attention again to the metrics, because UCF has played in their 9 games to this point the 3rd best rushing offense in FBS, the 5th best rushing offense in Memphis. Navy's 3rd, Memphis is 5th. Pitt is 10th. Florida Atlantic's 11th best in rushing offense. And they're getting Cincinnati this Saturday, who's 17th. So no wonder teams are running up against them. They're playing against some of the best rushing teams in the country who've been running over everybody. All right. So and one last point on this, and you mentioned Oklahoma. The double standard that UCF fans are really upset about is look what the narrative was coming off the Oklahoma Texas Tech game last week. Oklahoma wins by 1 point. They gave up a ton of yards, a ton of points. I think what was the final at 46-45 or something like that. And the narrative coming off of that was, well, that was a big conference game that Oklahoma won, and that's competition in the big city. Whereas if UCF does the same thing against Temple, who's also a conference opponent, the narrative is, well, how could they struggle against a team like Temple? What are they doing? It seems like it's like playing whack-a-mole if you're UCF. You keep knocking down every standard that comes up or every argument that comes up against you, and another one pops up where you just where you just knocked off that argument. So it's pretty frustrating, and that filters down to, again, the other 65 teams in FBS non-power conference leagues. There's 130 of them. Half of them are stuck in limbo because of those arguments.
Actually, we can find flaws with just about every team in the country, excluding one. And maybe with Clemson as well. We can add them over the last 4 or 5 weeks, but not the entirety of the season. So everybody has flaws. If we want to sit here and nitpick and look at flaws for every team, they are easy to find. They all have them. These are kids out there running around from 18 to 22 years old. There are flaws on these teams. And one of the reasons there are flaws is because they've got to play other really good athletes on the other side that expose those flaws. They're not out there. They're just out there running in shorts, throwing 7-on-7 drills. They're all going to look great. And if we had that kind of resistance doing our jobs, somebody trying to stop us from doing our jobs, we wouldn't be so good at our jobs either. That's one of the things that differentiates athletes and the competition out there is somebody's got to look bad. Somebody's got to look bad on every play, and somebody looks bad at the end of the game and doesn't come up successful regardless of how good they are.
Yeah.
We got Jeff Sharon on the line from SB Nation's platform for UCF football. It's black and gold banner. Please join him right there for Central Florida football talk as the Knights take on Cincinnati. 4-8 last year, got off to a great start, and that has continued. They beat UCLA in week 1. That was something in the range of a 2-touchdown upset, and then they've just carried it on through and played extremely well. What surprises me is that UCF at home, having won all these consecutive games, is, if I got this right based on what I saw today, Jeff, is a full touchdown underdog at home against the Bearcats.
I got to double check that one for you real quick, but Cincinnati is a very good team. 9-1 for Luke Fickell and his squad, coming off of that season last year. Now, bear in mind, last year, when these two teams faced off, the game got stopped after 3 quarters because there was a terrible rainstorm. By the way, UCF is a 7-point favorite.
There you go.
That's according to OddsShark. The over under is 60.
Just glancing at a TV screen real quick. Okay.
That's all right. But the game was stopped after 3 quarters, and UCF scored 53 points, and I think they scored touchdowns on every drive in that game. It was an offensive masterpiece last year. This is a different Cincinnati Bearcat ball club, and Luke Fickell, of course, who comes from the Urban Meyer tree over at Ohio State, deserves a tremendous amount of credit for what he's done with the Bearcats. Again, I mentioned that they're the 17th best rushing offense in the country. Their defense is scary good. Now, what's interesting to note, though, is that UCF is a pretty good running offense themselves. They're 4th in the country in rushing in FBS, and they're the highest ranked team that doesn't run the triple option. So we have ourselves kind of the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object. This is a team that's 6th in total defense in Cincinnati, facing the number 4 total offense in the country. It's the stage for this game is tremendous. ESPN College Game Day is going live from UCF this weekend. It's the first time that they've ever made a trip to UCF's campus. They're going to be set up on the Memory Mall out here, and UCF is really rolling out the red carpet. They are blowing this thing out for ESPN College Game Day, and the game itself is going to be televised at 8 p.m. on ABC, national television for UCF and Cincinnati. Say what you want. This is the big stage for UCF that UCF fans have been craving for years, especially since they opened up the on-campus stadium in 2007. There was always, what if College Game Day would ever come here? And now, winners of 22 games in a row, now is the chance. Everyone's going to see Spectrum Stadium, the Night Walk, in all of its glory in prime time. The game is already sold out. And there are people who are coming in. Last week was homecoming for UCF, but I know more people who are coming into town specifically just to see College Game Day on campus than they were last week for the actual homecoming. There's a lot of people that are coming here to Orlando that not for the game, to actually just see what College Game Day is all about. So this is a tremendous moment, not just for UCF football, but for the University of Central Florida as a whole. And it's a big coming out party, and they would like nothing more than to take care of Cincinnati home in what is essentially the American Athletic Conference East Division Championship game, because Cincinnati has ECU next week. They're more than likely going to clobber them, and this is a tremendous moment for the largest school by enrollment in the United States of America.
If you love UCF, check out Gold and Black Banner, the SB Nation platform for UCF football and all athletics.
Yes, all athletics. We just got done this past weekend. Men's soccer got into the NCAAs for the first time in 7 years, and women's volleyball got an NCAA berth as well. So, and we cover all of that. We cover all of that at blackandgoldbanneret.com. UCF_banneret on Twitter.
So again, if you love UCF, you check out Jeff and the crew over there. Even if you just, hey, like most of you, love college football and just want to keep up with as much as possible, you still check them out once a week to get the game previews, to get game recaps, all the news presented, and the analysis on UCF football. If you're trying to keep up with the elites of college football, 22 straight for the Knights. All right, Jeff, how would you compare this year's team versus last year's team? A lot of the people watching me are going to be checking out UCF for a first time, or if they're locked in the Power Five like me, although I love Group of Five football, I watch most of mine on Thursday and Friday night. So I've seen UCF in bits and pieces, but just because of the storyline last year and because of the buildup of the undefeated record, you know that most people saw South Florida. They saw the championship game in the conference, then saw, of course, the game against Auburn. And it's probably going to follow much like it did last year in regards to eyeballs building up across college football nation to see UCF here at the tail end.
Well, gosh, that's such a good question, comparing them to last year with Scott Frost's team, because yes, the offensive numbers are gaudy. Yes, the defense mostly is the bend but don't break philosophy. But UCF did, we'll admit, lose a lot of talent from last year's team, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Particularly, a guy like Shaquem Griffin, Trey Neal, who actually transferred to Nebraska from the defensive backfield, a couple key defensive linemen. But it is a much different team in terms of scheme and attack. And I think that the real difference this year is this team may not be quite as spectacularly talented as last year's team, but I do believe that they are much more mentally tough. Not saying that last year's team was not, but when you have guys who've stuck around, who've been through the fire of that last 3 games of last season, the USF game that was decided late, the Memphis game that was decided in overtime, you go into the furnace of the Peach Bowl and you take on a big time SEC foe like Auburn and you beat them. That's a really galvanizing force, and I think that the players who stayed behind, they remained unified even through the coaching change, because we know how tight that players do get with their coaches, especially their position coaches. There's nobody, like I said earlier, there's nobody left from last year's coaching staff. Everyone's gone. But they took last year, or the doubters from that's at the start of this year, as a real challenge. They thought that, hey, we're still the best team in the American Athletic Conference. We still belong on a national stage. We still think that we can beat any team in the country. They really do believe that. I know that a lot of people around the college football world may think they're absolutely crazy, but they really do believe that they belong on the same stage as Clemson and Alabama. And all these athletes ever want, you know this just as well as anybody, Mark. Any athlete at any level always says the same thing. They just want a shot. Just give me a shot. If I don't make it, fine. I can live with that. But I can't live with not getting a shot. I think that Josh Heupel has done a very good job of galvanizing his group. In addition to teaching them a new system. Remember, this is it's a much more vertical passing game that he runs for Mackenzie Milton. Mackenzie Milton has just been absolutely spectacular this year. He's had his share of growing pains with this new system, believe it or not. But he's so accurate with the football and makes such quick decisions. He's just a joy to watch. He's a joy to watch play quarterback. And get this, UCF is 4th in the country in rushing. No player has more than about 650 yards rushing. It really is running by committee. And this defense, even though they do give up their fair share of yards and of late fair share of points, they're coached by Randy Shannon. Randy Shannon is a defensive coordinator, and he's excellent at second half adjustments, as we've analyzed at Black and Gold Banneret as well. And this team has managed to force turnovers timely turnovers and get the job done. They almost lost that game up in Memphis in the rain, but they shut Memphis out in the second half, and that was due to Randy Shannon's scheme taking care of business. So I do think that if you've never exposed yourself to AAC football, if you want to see who the class of the Group of 5 schools are, if you want to see what all the hubbub is about UCF, Saturday night's your chance. Tune in and watch this game, because you're going to see one of the best offenses in the country facing off against one of the best defenses in the country. Their biggest test this year in Cincinnati. But this is UCF's grand opportunity to show everyone the atmosphere that we have here in East Orlando. It should be a beautiful night at Spectrum Stadium, and it's going to be a lot of fun. It's just a shame that 22 consecutive wins, 3 wins away from being one of the longest win streaks in modern college football since World War II, one of the top 15. And they're not even getting a sniff of consideration to see what they can do on the big stage against the likes of whoever, Alabama, Clemson, Michigan, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, you name it. That's a real shame, because we here in Orlando would love to see how UCF would stack up against those teams.
It is a shame, because you did get an opportunity against a team that did lose a few games, but was able to just weeks prior beat the #1 team in the nation and do it twice.
Yeah.
And then we've talked about the irony of obviously doing it on the same field that the national championship was played on, and having that transitive property against Auburn, having them then previously, of course, beat Georgia and Alabama. Jeff, let me throw this one out at you.
Okay.
So it's difficult for this committee and any one of us to evaluate the teams in the Power Five that don't play each other. So there's only so much connection between the SEC and the Big Ten and the ACC, et cetera, the 5 leagues, to say, oh, well, they look better than them, their resume's better than them. There's only so much connectivity between those leagues to make a reasonable evaluation. Then you bring in the group of 5, and whether it's that close or that close, wherever it is, and the upper echelon, the very tip top of the group of 5, obviously, we're talking about with UCF, is there a way to make a proper, something close to a reasonable evaluation of where they should place and how much better their record should be than the top of the Power 5 to slot them into one of the top 4? And how do we correct that?
The way we correct it is by having a playoff with at least 8 teams. Yep. That's the only way we can do it. At least 8. I'm actually one of those lunatics who thinks we should have 16, and have all 10 conference champions and 6 at-larges.
Did you think of that before me, or did I think about that before you? But I've said the same thing.
I really do believe that. I think it's the only way to truly, for once and for all, settle this. But the powers that be love what we're doing right now, right? This is the great revenue generator. It is discussing college football, especially in this day and age. And until the proper incentives kick in for those schools to essentially let the fans have the proper format for deciding all this, we're just going to, that's all we're going to do is just continue, continue talking about it. I think that there's a way that you could do it and I know a lot of people say, well, you're going to have to shorten the regular season. Well, if the argument with a playoff is, well, that makes the regular season less significant. Well, if you want to make it more significant, shorten it, right? There's ways that you can do this that also preserve that. And the other concern that I hear a lot is, well, you'd be asking these kids to play 16 games. That's not necessarily true. You'd be asking 2 teams out of 130 to play 16 games. And some of them, if they're an at-large team and they don't, for example, play in a conference championship, a la Alabama last year, guess what? They'll only play 15 games. So I just don't buy that argument about, we're having all these teams play all these extra games. No, you're not. You're having 2 teams play the extra games. And oh, by the way, here's this giant canvas bag of money with a dollar sign in front of it to have that extra set of games, right? It's a revenue generator. And I really would love to see, if I were the emperor of college football, a 16-team playoff, all conference champions get in, 6 at-larges. You seed it based on aggregated computer rankings, and then also I would like to see us shorten the regular season to 10. Have every team play an FCS. Everybody plays an FCS team at home. Have that be a preseason game that doesn't count against your record. Have 2 bye weeks, and you can do that. I've actually figured out how to do it in a calendar. And then we can have an actual playoff that goes through the month of December that will get tremendous ratings, and we can have the thing that we have at basketball. We can have a Cinderella in football. Wouldn't it be fun to see UCF or Utah State or Fresno State or a team like Houston, also in the American Athletic Conference, take on the likes of Alabama and Clemson? Let's figure out who really the best team in football is. As it is, those 65 teams in the so-called Group of 5 conferences, they're stuck in college football limbo because they're not in FCS where they have a full playoff, so they can't win a national championship there. And the committee sure as heck isn't going to put them into the 14 college playoff, which is basically bought and paid for by the 5 major conferences. So they're stuck. What can they possibly do? And it's the only sport in all of college sports where we do this, where there's a second-class citizenry essentially in their sports purgatory. And that's unfortunate because, a lot of us, like I said, UCF is the largest school in the United States of America by enrollment. There's a lot of alumni coming out of the school every year. About 15,000 people per year graduate from UCF. And that's only going to continue. It's only going to continue to be like that. That's more than any other state, any other college in the state of Florida. UF, Florida State, USF, everyone included. Even FIU. Wouldn't it be fun to see what a school like this can do?
Jeff, you're making some of the same arguments that I make all the time. So you and Steve lining up with me tonight, arguments that I've been making for 8 or 10 years on here. So
one day the committee will just ask us, and then we'll be able to provide them a unanimous opinion. Wouldn't it be great?
I've forgotten to give them my phone number. That's the problem.
I know. We have to like mass tweet these guys. We have to figure this out. Maybe we'll slide into their DMs. Who knows?
So much like the NCAA basketball tournament that you bring up, where you have definitely the top, I'm going to throw out a number, roughly 35 or 40 best teams in the country playing. And then you may have a gap because you're including some conference champions. So there may be the 40th best team in the country may be left out or something like that, and probably not going to contend for a national title once they start playing for the tournament anyway. And then you have, yes, lower teams. So if you had all 10 conferences represented, then you had 6 wild cards from that computer formula. Yes, you would not have the 16 best teams in the country. You would have the probably 9 or 10 or 11, probably further than that, something in
I'd say probably about 12 or 13
top teams in the country. Then you would fall off a cliff, and you would have the Sun Belt winner, who is the 72nd. If we were God and could come down and say they are the 72nd best team in the country, yes, they would be. You know what? But number one, most of the time they're going to get crushed in the first round, but they were given the opportunity that they earned, not given the opportunity. They earned the opportunity that they otherwise don't have because, again, they're in purgatory, as you mentioned. They're the only level of football or sports anywhere at this level that you can find that don't play for a championship. Number two, yes, if the likes of South Alabama has to play Ohio State and USC and fill in the blank every year after year, we're going to have a 116 game that's going to be 50-0 year after year. But there's going to come a time where there's going to be a really good game. And then there's going to come time where it may take a long time. One of those upsets are going to occur. But I at least just want to see the 28-21 game in the fourth quarter where Oklahoma's playing South Alabama. And hey, this is exciting.
That's a lot more likely in college football than, say the 116 seed in college basketball. As we've seen, it was only just this past year that the first ever 16 beat a 1 in the first round of college basketball. But if you're taking, say, the Sun Belt champion, okay, and you're stacking them up against Alabama, and Alabama's gotten through that SEC schedule, and let's say they won the SEC championship against Georgia, that's a pretty beat-up, tired Alabama team, I'm thinking, right? Probably going to play that game at home, let's say, in this hypothetical universe that we've cooked up out of thin air. Who's to say that they don't have a bad day? And who's to say that a team that the UCFs or the Utah States or the South Alabamas or the or the Tennessee or the MTSUs of the world don't walk into those places and say, you know what, we can beat this team. All you got to do is just lace them up and play for 60 minutes. I think that would be a fun experiment to have. And if there's one thing that we know from college football in the month of September, it's that stuff does happen. Okay? Go ask Michigan what happened about 10 years ago when they played then FCS Appalachian State. And they were ranked number 5 in the country. And no one gave them a chance. I mean, for crying out loud, you could take any number. I would put any group of 5 team in there in a one-game situation against any team in the country, and they certainly have a non-zero shot. Yeah, you're probably going to see some blowouts if those power conference teams take care of business. But eventually someone's got to hit somebody, and wouldn't it be fun to see when that actually happens? You could see you have that potential to drive a different kind of viewership, a different kind of narrative when you have that. And by the way, it ensures that all 130 teams at the start of every season, you don't have to do two years of work. You only have to do one. And in some cases, like UCF, they may do 2 years of work of being undefeated and still not get a shot.
Jeff, in theory, I agree with everything that you just stated in regards to affording the opportunity and earning that opportunity based on the field championships for those lower divisions. But I'm not quite as optimistic of those teams competing against the likes of the top 5 to 10 in college football. I think it would be a complete, okay, we are taking all the conference champions, right? So we're including Conference USA in the Sun Belt. So in the group of 5, yes, the American and the Mountain West are right there. But once we drop to the MAC, the Sun Belt, Conference USA, I have a difficult time envisioning those teams competing with the very best teams in college football, Georgia, Ohio State, whoever it is for that particular year. I think those games would be annihilations most of the time, but it would be intriguing because I'm guessing once out of every 8 to 10 years, we've got a really good game in the fourth quarter.
Isn't that? But isn't that worth it? We live in this world on media. We live in this world in the media where, hey, are you watching ESPN2? Look what's happening with, say, UAB against Alabama. By the way, UAB clinched their division in Conference USA. However, 2-3 years after they didn't have a program. So, boy, wouldn't that be fun to watch as well? I agree with you that most of the people calling the shots are going to say, look, that's just way too much at this point. That's fine, but I think that what UCF's role is this year. And I think what we're going to see from other schools as time goes by, next year, I think Houston's going to have a very good year in the American. We always have to watch out what teams do in the Mountain West. And in the MAC, I mean, look at what Buffalo's been doing at 9-1 as well. You never know what these teams are going to be able to, come up with in terms of talent. And considering the fact that, Michigan and Alabama and Clemson fans don't want to admit this, but the world of college football is a lot flatter than it used to be 25 years ago. Ever since the scholarships went down to 85 in 1992, look what's happened just here in the state of Florida. It used to be just 3 schools, Florida State, and Miami. Now, since they dropped the scholarship limit to 85, we've seen UCF move up from then 1AA to 1A and into a conference. Okay. Mind you, UCF started out as a Division III team in 1979. So they paid their dues moving up the ladder. USF started football in 1997. We've seen FAU start football in the early 2000s. FIU start football in the early 2000s. So that has flattened the talent pool out. We have a lot more kids going out these days for football, and we have a lot more opportunities for them to go. And these schools do provide them opportunities like UCF, and coaches can recruit at places like UCF and say, hey, do you want to sit the bench for 3 years at Alabama, or do you want to come start your freshman year for me? And that's a very powerful argument that they can make in recruiting. I think you're right, though, that the next step is most likely going to be 8. I just think that what I would like to see when the playoff, and I do believe that come the next round of television negotiations, that the playoff is going to expand to I would hope 8. I'm hearing 6 all the time from people. It should be 8. I would hope that you had, buys are ridiculous, but I would hope that the way you come up with those 8 is you tie it to the conferences and you say, all right, the 5 power conference champions get in, right? So ACC, Big 10, SEC, Pac-12, Big 12. And then we'll take the highest ranked team from the other 5 conferences. In this case, it would be UCF. That would be a fun little race to have so that we get our Cinderella. And then you can take the 2 wild cards. And those would most likely obviously be Power 5 teams, but at least everyone who wants to root for the little guy has one little guy to root for. And that would totally change the dynamic of college football. And I think it would make the regular season that much more significant, because now we know that the conference races all matter. Okay. Someone's going to get that berth. The conference races all matter. The group of 5 teams know that they're in their own sprint to the finish line. We all know that matters. And oh, by the way, you still get that. You say, well, the more berths you have, the more second chances you give people. I got news for you. You will lose that second game. You're probably not going to get into that extra spot as a wild card. So, I think it would totally change the dynamic. Like I said, it's not perfect, but for me, it would be good enough.
I totally agree, Jeff. I made the same argument when we went from 2 to 4 that people were talking about. Well, the season's going to be less significant. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's rubbish. It's more significant.
The season was less significant when we only had 2 teams, and the way we selected those 2 was a farce as well. But anyway, the deal is though, yes, the season was extremely significant for about 6 or 8 teams the last couple of weeks of the season. It was insignificant for everyone else.
Right.
We would sit here the weekend before championship weekend, and there would be like 3 games of significance. And everybody would be hyper-focused on like 3 games. And yeah, they were monumental, but everything else was insignificant toward a championship.
And if you're a television network like ESPN or Fox, or NBC and Universal, NBC and Comcast, don't you want more significant football games? You definitely want more significant football games, because that raises the value of your product. Okay, like you said in the past, when we only had 2 teams, you lose 1 game, you're more than likely out of it. You lose 2, you're definitely out of it. So then, what's the point of watching some of those games late in the season? Now it's a little bit more significant, but not quite to the point where it can be. By expanding the playoffs, you do provide that extra incentive for people to watch. Hey, let's take a look at not just what Clemson is doing, but let's see what's going on with the Syracuse team this year. By the way, they might have a shot at it. For example, I went to Syracuse for grad school. I'd love to see that. Right, first time in 20 years that they have a chance to go to a major bowl game. So, I just don't buy the argument that it devalues the regular season. That makes no sense whatsoever, especially when we consider, and no one wants to admit this, but it's true. College football is a business, and the way you run the business is you try to get it to make as much money for you as possible. And the driver of that business is television. Okay. And what drives television? Ratings. More people are going to tune in when more games matter.
Got Jeff Sharon on the line from SB Nation's platform for UCF. It is Black and Gold Banner. Jeff, we appreciate you stopping by. My last argument in all this, and I've said it many times as well, but I will take this opportunity soon since we are in the midst of it, is that no one has an issue with the NFL having 12 teams in the playoffs out of 30. So 1/3 of the league, more than 1/3 of the league, about 38% of the league makes the playoffs, the postseason. I have a few guests who come on here who I greatly respect and admire, have a great discussion with them. But on this one point, I don't understand the logic that they think that this would just, even at 8 teams, would greatly water down the playoff. 8 out of 130, it's like 6% of the entire nation.
What are we talking about there?
Yes, like 8 out of 130. You have to be elite. 8 out of 130. And then on top of that, they say, well, can you imagine the number 8 team in the country? They've probably lost 2 games. So, okay, awful. They're 11-2. Let's say that that's not worthy for whatever reason. I looked at previous years. One year it was Michigan State. They're 11-2. They're number 8 in the country. But to win a national title, that team not only had to achieve at that level, winning 11 of 13 games, they then would have to beat the number 1 team in the country in round 1. Then they would have to beat 2 of the other top 7 teams. They would have to beat 3 of the top 7 teams in the country consecutively to win the national title. And if that's not earning a national title, I don't know what is.
Exactly. That's the other thing, is that we know how difficult the road would be, because it's a 1-game situation. And again, we're not letting 64 out of 130 teams into this playoff. You're still getting the absolute cream of the crop. Okay, no one can make the argument that the number 8 seed in an 18 playoff is, as we were alluding to, a trash team, right? There's no way that you can make that argument. So yeah, we're starting to see the demand now really come to the fore. And, my buddy Eric Lopez, who I host our podcast with, he says this all the time: this is a slow moving sport. I'm like, yeah, it's a slow moving sport, but it's no longer a slow moving world. It's a fast moving world. And what moves the world fast is business. And if ESPN or whoever is going to get the next contract when it comes to, I think it's 2024, 2025, somewhere around there, if they sniff an opportunity to make even more money, believe me, they're going to chase that money, because we live in a much more fractured media world now. It's a lot harder to get eyeballs on TV to watch, to watch anything, really. The only thing that people watch with any semblance of regularity is live sporting events. And when you have, and in this case, when you have a playoff in college football that's not run by ESPN, but is televised by ESPN. Got to remember this, the other thing too. ESPN and ABC, which are owned by Disney, they can't carry the Super Bowl, all right, which is the biggest television event that there is in the world every year. The other three of the big 4 networks can, but they can't. Okay, so that's why we have, in a partial way, why we have the playoff, because if you add up the viewership for those 3 football games, it comes not quite to the level, but pretty close to a Super Bowl. And those are games that everyone tunes in for. Okay, so if you expand that package, that is ESPN and ABC's Super Bowl right there. We would have 7 games if it went to 8. So yeah, it's one of those things where you and I might sit here, Mark, and say, well, it makes too much sense, and that's why it won't happen. I think we're well past that. I think we're at a point where it does make sense. We just have to wait for the contracts to run out and get renegotiated.
Meanwhile, we will wait to see when UCF loses its next football game, and Jeff Sharon and everybody else with the black and gold banner and UCF Nation hopes it's not here in 2018, but they complete another run to an undefeated status, which is going to have to mean a win over a tough Cincinnati club this week, a conference championship game again, and then a bowl berth against who knows who. If we have complete chaos, maybe it's in a college football playoff. If the likes of Northwestern and Pitt can win conference championship games, we shall see. Jeff, we appreciate you stopping by and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Mark. It's always good to talk to you. Enjoy the game on Saturday night. It should be a fun one.
We will, definitely. Cincinnati and UCF on ABC